Rhea. It gives me great pleasure to introduce her. She's a member of the Rotary Club of Cairns, Sunrise, Australia. She's a recipient of the Order of Australia Medal and the founder of the world's greatest meal that has generated $7 million to fight polio. When Suzanne became polio chair of Rotary District 9550 in Queensland, Australia, she was living a quiet retirement life of reading books and gardening. But as she brainstormed ways to engage fellow Rotarians in the campaign to end polio, she had an idea and her life changed completely. In 2014, Suzanne founded the World's Greatest Meal, a program in which Rotarians host meals, anything from 2 people having lunch to elaborate gourmet dinners, and ask for donations. World's Greatest Meal started small, but has grown enormously. And with the matching funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World's Greatest Meal has raised over $7 million to date. To keep the momentum alive, Suzanne reverse mortgaged her house and embarked on a world tour, speaking, vaccinating, and motivating across 32 countries. She pays her own way, and local Rotary members host her whenever possible. She says, we raise awareness as well as funds. I spent a lot of time explaining what goes on in Pakistan with the training of the polio workers. Suzanne is a polio survivor from childhood herself, and she doesn't focus on that. Instead, her motivation is to make an impact during her retirement. Some meals bring in a lot of money, but Suzanne says the number of participants is more important. A big donation is wonderful, she says, but my idea is that giving back polio eradication to the ordinary Rotarian, or grassroots Rotarians, as I like to call them, because no Rotarian is ordinary. I'll give you the introduction in just a second that she asked me to give. So fellow Rotarians, please join me in a round of applause for our guest of honor, Suzanne, who's raised more than $7 million to fight polio. Suzanne, please tell us whatever you want to tell us in the next 4 minutes.
All right.
Well, Suzanne, which is what she asked for as an introduction, just a few words.
Thank you, John. And just to correct a couple of things, I'm the co-founder of World's Greatest Meal, and we've raised actually $12 million. So that's a good start. When I was just starting out, I was very lucky with the people I met. And throughout the world, I found a lot of supporters. I hate to say it, but my sound is really bad. Are you hearing me okay, John? Can't hear you.
Think if you turn off the other link, Suzanne, it'll stop echoing.
Yeah,
yes, maybe that will suppress the echo. If you're not Ola and you're not me and you're not Suzanne, please mute yourself.
Okay, that's much better, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so did you hear anything I said?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm still getting this problem.
Okay, are you there?
I think we solved the sound problem. I was very lucky to meet so many people at conventions and things like that, and they were always inviting me to go to, you know, amazing places and attend conferences and seminars, and I did that. I even met and married a Pakistani and lived in Pakistan for on and off for 4 years. So, you know, really got involved with what was happening in Pakistan as one of the epicenter countries. I think throughout the years, we have been making great strides with polio. And this year, of course, you all know that we've just got one case in Pakistan and one in Afghanistan. So just to say, I have met Anne. She's the most terrific speaker, and I met her first in Harrogate at a conference, RIBI conference. And I also met her when she was invested with a member of the British Empire, and at a very glitzy party. So I feel I'm amongst friends, and I'm sure my 4 minutes is up, and I apologize about the echo. Okay.
John, almost.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your remarks. And now I'd like to move on to our keynote speaker. We're superbly honored to have one of the world's foremost ambassadors for polio eradication and advocacy for equality in sport, Anne Wafula Strike, who, as Suzanne just told us, is also a recipient as of the MBE award, member of the British Empire. She has a simply amazing story, which I'll let her tell in your own words. But here's a few details about her life of courage, commitment, passion, and accomplishment. She was born, raised, and graduated from university in Kenya, but I'll let her tell you the rest of that story. Anne provides a personal example of determination that challenges misconceptions about disability, ableism, and race. Athlete, sporting ambassador, author, and disability and rights inclusion campaigner, Anne inspires achievement and excellence across a broad range of life situations through advocacy and lobbying government and policymakers. Anne is a Paralympian, wheelchair racer, and a conqueror who demonstrates that it's possible to break down barriers. She's the first Black personality to serve on a government-funded sports board in Britain. Anne is one of the Purple for Polio campaign ambassadors to help Rotary rid the world of the crippling disease. In 2020, she was appointed as a Commonwealth Special Envoy, champion for equality in sports, with the role to promote the Commonwealth's values and principles around the world. She continues to advocate for an accessible and inclusive society. She holds a Bachelor of Ed degree and supports various not-for-profit organizations both at the national and international level. As the first Action on Disability and Development Goodwill Ambassador, she successfully supported and campaigned for nations to ratify the UN Convention on the Rights and Dignity of Persons with Disabilities. She's a lobbyist at international parliamentary conferences on Millennium Development Goals. In 2010, HarperCollins published her autobiography, which has the intriguing name of In My Dreams I Dance. In 2014, she was awarded the MBE for service to charity and disability sport, and continues to lobby to further the interests of disabled people in the UK and developing nations. And the Zoom screen is yours. We're not hearing you, Anne. Anne, would you unmute, please?
I have unmuted. I was hoping that Ola would play that clip, but it seems like the clip is...
Okay.
It's not the disabilities that we have. It's not the obstacles that we encounter in our lives that should define us. I think what defines us is how we overcome these challenges and the difficulties that are there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for the introduction, and thank you, Ola, for actually this invite. And honestly, I just want to thank all of you Rotarians for the amazing work that you do. And I know sometimes I always say, oh, where were the Rotarians when I was young? Because if this job would have started many years ago, maybe I would not have contracted polio, because you're doing such an amazing job. And I know it's something that you started, many people will want to take credit for the work that you are doing. Many big names will want to take credit, but if the Rotarians hadn't started this fight against polio, I don't think the world would have taken notice. I don't think the world would have listened. So I just sort of, I've got 20 hours and I'm going to sort of like, just be very quick and, very brief. Oh, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go.
Okay, thank you. I thought somebody was telling me something. It's really interesting that when you're, on this Zoom, we have people from African nations, which is really encouraging. I'm originally from Kenya, and I was born as a very normal, healthy child with no disability at all. And I am told that I was one of the, when I was born, I was healthy. I was one of the most healthy children that my mom had ever had. And at the age of 2.5, I suddenly got ill. I am told that I was coming from the river with my mother, a toddler following the mother and copying what mom was doing. And I started to cry, I was sweating and, I was sort of just, my body suddenly went, numb or limp, and I couldn't lift my hands up. And, I just cried, most of the night, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. So they took me to a witch doctor. That was what was happening then. So the witch doctor looked at me, and the witch doctor said, oh, I think this is black magic. I'm going to treat her. I'm going to give her some of this, this concoction, and she's going to feel better. But I did not feel better. And after some time, the villagers thought, this family is cursed. There's something wrong with this family. And because of that, we do not want them here in the village. So, in that process of people not understanding what was happening to me, and, being so traditional, tied down with customs, traditions, and, all the prejudice started to, to be thrown at us. And they tried to ban my dad's house several times. And on the second occasion, my dad was advised to actually leave the village. So when they were coming to burn the house down, when they tried the third time, the following morning, my dad woke up together with my mother and my other siblings, and my dad flee from the village. And we ended up growing up in the in the capital city of Kenya, which is Nairobi. It is just sort of, it is by luck because my dad was in the army, and he told his army major what had happened, and they gave him a single room. So there we were together in this single room, but at least we were safe from the village. After a few days of settling in Nairobi, my father took me to a proper hospital. And in this hospital, there was two British doctors who looked at me, and they said to my dad, after carrying out all the examination and all that, they said, "Oh, Mr. Wafula, your daughter actually contracted polio." And my father was like, "What is polio? What are you talking about? What is polio?" And the doctors tried to explain to my father what polio was and how polio is contracted. And then, just to make the long story short, I started rehabilitation because I'd sort of been so ill for so many months. So I started the rehabilitation, and I started a bit of treatment. When I became a little bit older, I went back and they fitted me with leg braces, and they gave me crutches to help me hobble about. And that was my life. And so from being a normal, healthy, able-bodied child to suddenly acquiring a different name. And in those days, they did not call me disabled, but they called me a cripple. So I became Anne, beautiful, born, nice, healthy. Then, or that girl, that cripple girl in that house who, if I wasn't sort of like struggling to walk on my leg braces and crutches, I would be crawling on my hands and knees, because that is what I was doing before I was fitted with the leg braces. The stigma and the prejudice is something that I experienced from a very early age, because that was me, that was my life. But let me tell you something. Being different actually became my superpower. Being different, having that disability, made me more determined than before, especially when I realized that other children will not even want to come and play with me because their parents were so afraid that they would contract what I had because they did not know what it was. But the stigmas and the fact that I was now different, crawling on my hands and knees when I didn't have my calipers and crutches, that really became my superpower. And I learned that I wasn't a victim. I kept reminding my name that I am not a victim of this horrible thing called polio that has happened to me and changed my life. I started to say to myself that I am a survivor. And the older I became, or the older, when I grew up, I realized that I'd been disabled by polio, yes, but I was not going to cry and let that devastation, happen to me. I wanted to make sure that I will stand up in the world and sort of just like make people know that really, thanks for putting that when you have that disability, the fact that I have, I'm a polio survivor, I will not let that define me. And that becomes the sweetest thing, really. So without a disability, nobody sort of really wants to find out more about you. But when you have a disability, many people will sort of like quickly want to sort of like define you by that disability. But we shouldn't let that happen, because we are all broken in some way. And in most cases, what we see, what we see as broken actually isn't, because people see me as that disabled woman, that polio victim, the way they want to call me. But I go and I start to ask myself, or I ask them, what is normal really? If you're saying that I am not a normal person, can you stand up and say to me that you are really normal? And because of the stigma and the prejudice of polio also, I have just sort of really realized that the world can quickly and easily ostracize you because you are different, because that is what happened to me. You know, in this picture, actually, I'm sitting in front of the mud hut that I was born in. I was born in that mud hut. And this is the mud hut that the villagers wanted to burn, because it was just a very tiny, it's a tiny mud hut, but it is still there in my dad's homestead up to now. A few years ago, when BBC were doing a documentary, they were doing a small documentary, and we went with them to Africa. They actually wanted to see this mud hut. So the mud hut is still there. And I'm hoping that one day, everybody who is on this conference, anybody who would like to join me in Africa on the mission that I do to support, the other disabled people, you are really, really welcome to sit inside this mud hut and have a cup of tea, or have in Africa, we call it chai. But let me tell you also that as a polio, as a polio survivor, we continue to see that law and policy affects what we go through, because we are talking about polio now, but we forget that there's also something that is called PPS, and this is post-polio syndrome. And this is a condition that you get and you start to experience several years after you've lived with polio. And that is where I am now, because I'm starting to struggle. Not I'm starting, but I am struggling with the late effects. In the US, you call it the late effects of polio, but here we call it post-polio syndrome. And I think every time or every day when I wake up, I remind myself that I am privileged. I am lucky that I now live in the UK. And I cannot forget where I came from, Africa. I cannot forget where where equality and inclusion is something that nobody ever talks about, where people such as myself are still begging, in the streets, people with disabilities, or people, even older people who've survived polio, or even who become disabled through different other diseases or things like that, are still struggling and excluded. And why is that? It is because when we talk about equality and inclusion, it is really oppression to some societies, but to people such as myself, it becomes liberation. And that's why I love Rotary so much. I love all the Rotarians, because that is exactly what they're trying to do, or not trying, but that is what you do, guys. You bring that liberation to the oppressed. You bring that liberation to people who are cast down, trodden on, people who society looks at them like they've got no value. Because as much as people want to talk about disability, even governments, we just know that their policies really, many of their policies, they ignore giving dignity and value to all human beings, regardless of their disability and sometimes their gender or their race or their religion. And that's why when you talk of Rotary, it's a strong foundation, or it's a strong group of people who do those things regardless of who you are, regardless of your disability. You are just bringing good to the world. And that is why I am so excited to be associated with Rotary. And the more I speak at Rotary conferences, I just realize that I should never allow myself to be a victim, But every day, as a polio survivor, it is learning to turn that negative into a positive every day of my life, learning to turn a negative into a positive. And that's why a few years ago, I sort of started a foundation, and my foundation is called the Anne Wafula Foundation. And what the Anne Wafula Foundation does is to give education scholarships to disabled people. We do a lot of wheelchair donations, wheelchairs that are actually made for the terrain of Africa, but also we do advocacy work, because we realize that without advocacy, without advocacy, you cannot sort of go really far. Without advocacy, you can't really reach the people who are supposed to be hearing the message. So today when I speak to you, I just sort of really want to remind you again that disability does not mean inability. Disability does not mean inability. Ola has put up a picture of this. This is the last time I was in Kenya. This was in 2019 when we had a big mission in a slum called Kibera slum, in Kenya. And maybe Barbara would have heard of Kibera. And we went to give wheelchairs. But even after we gave wheelchairs, we started to ask ourselves, what next after we've given these wheelchairs to this group of people? Because they still live in conditions that that you cannot even start to imagine. They still live in conditions where there's no running water, there's no electricity, there's a pit latrine. And I know this because when I was growing up, I needed to use a pit latrine because that is what was there. And I constantly suffered from wounds, on my hands, on my bottom, because that was the only way that I knew how to sort of like go and use the pit latrine. For those ones who don't know the pit latrine, it's like there's just a big hole, on the floor, and you have to go there, squat, and do your business. But because of my disability, or because of the disabilities of these other people, many people struggle with that. As a foundation, we keep getting so many requests that we are not even able to to do that. So what I do is I raise funds, and then when I get the money, I give it through a wheelchair foundation, which is run by Rotary, and they get us brand new wheelchairs that we send to Kenya, and we distribute it to those people who need. So from these pictures, you'll see that some of them already have wheelchairs, and some of them don't have wheelchairs. Ola, can you play that small clip of a polio survivor who is still crawling on their hands and knees up to this very day? They don't have a wheelchair. And this is a clip of this man who is now 47 years, still crawling on their hands and knees. And when I see these things, when people from Africa and from other parts of the world send me such clips, I'm like, I must keep taking out my begging bowl so that Rotarians and many other people can continue to actually help me raise funds so that we can at least elevate some of these people, give them a wheelchair, and sort of like really make sure that their dignity is restored. So this is a polio survivor. And what is tomorrow? Tomorrow is World Polio Day. And the reason why I'm sharing, or the reason why I've shared that clip, is because we have eradicated polio in some countries, while some countries are still struggling. So I just want to urge you, please do not get tired of giving towards polio eradication. Polio breaks homes, polio does terrible things. Polio separates. Polio robs people from living to their full potential. I am lucky that I came to this country and I was introduced to wheelchair racing. I became a Paralympian. But oh my goodness, I used that as a platform to speak about, the horrible things that polio does. So today, let us encourage one another. Let us encourage one another, and let us continue giving. And as you are giving towards polio eradication, please also remember to give to my foundation, which is the Anne Wafula Foundation, so that we can continue to donate and give wheelchairs and enable these people with disabilities to at least realize their potential. It may not be their full potential, especially because of where they are, but we can at least give them back their dignity. So thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's a marvelous call to action to follow in your footsteps as much as possible to help others. So at this point, we'll entertain some questions, either for Anne or Suzanne. So who's first? Well, that's a resounding response there. Does anyone have a question for either Anne or Suzanne? Okay.